I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Mackenzie Davis, who stars as Kirsten Raymond on the acclaimed post-apocalyptic limited series Station 11. You know what, Mackenzie? I love this series, and I
Oh,
hear from so many people how much this show means to them. And, for many reasons. For me, it was how the show made me feel about these characters who live to fight another day after this horrifying pandemic. What did you most love about the story and portraying Kirsten?
I mean, God, it changed a lot. I mean, the show I signed up for ended up being a very different show that we made, and then a very different show after production and everything. Partly because when we signed up for it, there wasn't a pandemic to underscore our experience and the story we were telling. I mean, initially, I loved just the sort of mission of the series was to tell a post-apocalyptic story without using any of the tropes or sort of easy markers of a post-apocalyptic story. So rather than sort of savage humanity and, nonstop bloodshed, it was like hope and art and the things that are actually worth living for, and bucolic verdant nature, and just
Yeah,
these things that are normally not the aesthetics or the sort of tonal markers of life after devastation. And I want to be a part of things that are beautiful and meaningful and add something to the world rather than just reiterate horror.
yeah,
So I liked
yeah.
that.
That makes sense. Obviously there's a place for that for the pandemic genre, subgenre, and I actually really enjoy that stuff. But I remember when it came out, Station 11 came out, and we watch so much content these days. And a good friend of mine said, "Hey, Rob, you need to get onto this show." And I was like, "Yeah. I'm not really in the mood for pandemic drama because we're living it right now, and I'm, pretty stressed out." She's just like, no, you don't understand. This show is about how life affirming things can be and how art sustains humanity. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. And it totally blew my mind. I'm curious about what you think about how the show really focuses on how art, theatre, music is really what matters to us as human beings at the end of the day.
Oh, I love it. It's so simple, and yet it feels very new in a strange way because we're so used to visions of a future being marked by war and this like sexless, joyless life where you're just clawing out an existence. My question was always like, why? Why do you keep living? Like, that seems
Yeah.
horrible. What is motivating this? Like, just this sort of loyalty to the human race? We keep living? Like, no, you want to have connection and joy and ecstasy. You can have sadness and devastation, but only as part of a cocktail of life. And I loved how this show, yeah, again, it's so simple. Of course, that's how a society would rebuild itself, but we just haven't seen that version of it very often. And it's also hard to tell really earnest stories. It's easier to tell sort of cynical or horrifying stories. Finding the tone for a story about like human connection and love and positivity and on relationship building through art, for me, that pitch sounds almost as hard as a pandemic show during a pandemic. Like, that's
Yeah.
a very difficult tone to get, and I think the show did it beautifully. But I don't know, I think being earnest is really brave and hard because there's nothing to hide behind. It's just like, I believe in love, and that's,
Yeah.
I love that.
We don't really get that very often, and it's so
Yeah.
refreshing. Well, speaking of pandemics, and I know this is always covered in the media about this show, but it fascinates me all this time later. I mean, production resumed in early 2021, so
Mhm.
it shut down for a long time. And when you had all come to set to work on the pilot, there was no pandemic. What was it like in your mind creating this world in Toronto and also having to deal with it as this shared experience that we were all suffering through?
It was really, I was just talking about this yesterday. Um, it was a very intense experience. It was almost like we like lived the first year of the pandemic again, like all of the sort
Yeah.
of the most sort of extreme version of it. It was really important that none of us got sick for multiple reasons, but because we were going to set with, 150 or 200 people every day, and we would stop production if Himesh got sick or if I got sick. So we really had to keep our distance and be pretty rigorous in terms of socializing and mask wearing and just staying safe, and that just created a strange dynamic to live through after we'd already done it for 1 year and then learned a lot of information and had like gotten somewhat not used to it, but there wasn't that sort of like shock of March 2020 when everything felt like the world was ending. And it was strange to revisit it, but in a way it also like let us process a lot of the sort of trauma from the preceding year. I think because things move so fast, and I was really lucky I didn't lose anybody in the pandemic. And even for people that did lose someone in the pandemic, there was so much grief and loss that there wasn't a space to grieve like what you had lost personally, and this like enormous change in the way your world looked and acted, and your relationship to freedom and access to things, because we just had to sort of keep moving forward. And I feel like the show kind of created a space for us to like mourn this thing that we hadn't mourned fully.
Yeah, it reminds me, you're quoted in Esquire as saying, trauma can be a beautiful tool. What did you mean by that?
I'm not sure. It's always interesting to hear.
It was a while ago.
My mind's like, think of something to say. Well, I don't know. Maybe I was talking about Kirsten processing her grief through art. I don't know if I think it's a beautiful tool, more that like it doesn't need to be relegated to a negative space. Like I believe that all emotions are rich and great. Even the most unpleasant ones, if you can sort of sit in it and be like, well, this is really intense and sharp, and I hate this feeling, but I also like am feeling so much of this thing I hate. I don't know. There's just something, I think it's like kind of a Jedi mind trick to figure out how to like even unpleasant things. I don't know what I meant by that. I've just
surely, for a performer, for an actor, it's those kinds of really intense emotions that as a layperson and not a performer, I just can't imagine how difficult it must be to tap into that stuff and to play a character that is externally and necessarily quite tough, like Kirsten is, but is so obviously internally vulnerable at the same time. And it comes through a subtle glance, an intentional pause, a hesitation, and she does a lot of that. You do that really beautifully. Was that really challenging to get right?
I think I was feeling a lot of things in the making of this show, and I related to Kirsten a lot more than I realized at the time. This like need to compartmentalize things in order to survive. This like imperative to feel a deep grief and sadness, but also do your job and also take care of this thing. And it's what we all do. I think it was just the most acute expression of that thing during the filming of the show. So I really related to this need to let grief and sadness live inside, but to survive, to like hold it off to the side and only let it out sometimes. And I also just I like silent characters. Not that Kirsten is fully silent, but I like, it's what's so lovely about the medium of cinema and film is that you can feel things and the camera will pick it up, and you can think things and the camera will pick it up, and you don't need to communicate all of your feelings through words or gestures. Sometimes you can just, if you're working with sensitive people, like allow for silence to say everything, which I think, and Himesh and I really talked about this a lot for our sort of reunion scene, is that there's something that words cannot encapsulate, and to use words would actually take away from the enormity of a thing. And it's hard to find collaborators like, you know, Jeremy Podeswa and Patrick Somerville, who also understand that the most important thing is to say nothing. So that felt very lucky.
Yeah, obviously you're talking about when Sheldry and Kirsten reunite at the end, and just thinking about it, actually, I don't remember who I was saying, maybe it was Patrick, maybe it was Himesh, that I found it really satisfying, and I was really happy with the way it ended, and I'm happy that we don't need to have the 10 seasons of Station 11. We're good. They decide to reunite a year later when the Traveling Symphony comes back around. Perfect. And the way that you two played that, like, I was really sad that you were going to say goodbye, but it just made me feel really good. And I think that's actually not easy to achieve on a show, particularly because we're all so cynical, as you mentioned earlier. What did you think of the ending? Were you satisfied as well?
I loved it. I mean, I think, yeah, I was deeply satisfied. I think any more words or promises, explanations, or time together would have felt dishonest. Like, it's already this sort of miracle that they find each other, but it's like an important miracle to be given to the audience and to us to like have some sort of conclusion, but not feel like we're in the Truman Show and there's, you know, everything has been constructed by this God figure to make sure the storylines wrap up perfectly. Although I guess that is literally what a television show is. But let's move on. I was really, really satisfied. I anything more wouldn't have felt good to me, and anything less would have felt like, well, what was this all for?
Yeah, true. I'm really curious as well about talking about how you play a character that another actor has to play at a younger age. Matilda Lawler plays Kirsten as a young girl. What typically happens? Do you get together with that actor and do you talk about the character to get some kind of consistency? Do you not see each other at all? How does that work on this show?
Something in the middle of that. I mean, the interesting thing is that the Matilda originated the character. They started shooting in January and February of 2020. I was on another job. I wasn't with them. And I would just get sent dailies of what Matilda was doing. I'd never met her, talked to her. In retrospect, I guess I should have, but
No.
She's great. And it was really interesting. So I got to see her work and who she was, and her, like, she's really funny mannerisms, and the way she thinks and moves her face when she thinks and feels things is really particular. And then the show shut down for a year, and Matilda and I met, I think, a year later over several Zoom meetings, just talking, getting to know each other more than anything. There wasn't a, like, mostly because I'm just not this type of person or actor, like we didn't have like a plan and a backstory that we talked about all the time. I mean, she never needed to play me and I never needed to play her, but I got to imagine and take all the stuff she was doing and incorporate it into my character, but I didn't feel like us having a singular vision for her mattered, because she is 12 and I'm playing a 28-year-old, and those are two very different people separated by an unseen period of 20 years or 32. Yeah. Anyways, however old she is. Yeah. Where she becomes a different person. Yeah. That being said, the first episode we shot when we came back together was episode 7, which is me sort of haunting my childhood self. And I'm mostly in the background or like in the corners, just watching this life that happened. And it was this incredible gift for me that I just got to see both Matilda behave and to sort of absorb her osmotically, rather than like making a plan in a spreadsheet for how we were going to communicate the same character. And I got to like actually form memories of that time by watching her and Jeevan and Frank together. And not imagine what it was like, but see my childhood lived in front of me. So when I thought about it later, I had these like very visceral images and feelings just sort of ready to go, which was such a great gift.
I know, I was going to mention episode 7. It's my favorite episode. It just is a masterpiece. It's amazing how you don't get opportunities very often, I think, as a performer, to be in a scene or in scenes where you are in your own flashback. It's just so unusual, so different, so unique. And Naban Rizwan and Himesh Patel, they're both fantastic in this. I was just wondering, how do you play that? Like, did you have a particular idea of how you wanted to tackle what Kirsten was doing there and how she was responding to what, this really devastating moment in her whole life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny. What I just drifted off to think about was that what I initially thought and what it ended up being on the day and what it ended up being in the edit are all like kind of different things. But I know that the most important thing for me was she had a child's understanding of that time period. She didn't have an adult's understanding, and it was fixed in that time. And she needed to go back and see, one, that it wasn't her fault, and also see the sort of sacrifices that these men were making for her, and the joy of this time, and not just the trauma, and not just losing Frank and this horrible thing that has sort of coded the whole 60 days in the apartment as this tragedy, but actually it was this like true family that came together, and there was so much love and shelter from the storm, literally and metaphorically. So yeah, I don't know. I felt like, I don't know. I just wanted to watch and like see what it was like from an adult's mind, and also from like an adult's height. The things that you can't see when you're a child, the like corners you can't look around, the rooms you can't be inside, the drawers that you can't see into, the like context that's given from that. And yeah.
It's the space that you inhabit as a child is so different to the space that you inhabit as an adult, not only emotionally but physically.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
It's
I was
just
thinking about that a lot with the man who comes into the apartment and ultimately does something, and how faceless he would have been, because I saw him and then ran into my little room as a child, and as an adult I got to like look into his eyes. And the man who plays this character is unbelievable. It's such a brief moment in time, and he looks, and he's enormous, like he's a very imposing man, and he looks so scared and so sad and so like traumatized. And I feel like seeing that and seeing, it's the to the monsters we're the monsters thing, that like there are no villains, that everybody's really just trying to survive and doing it badly because they've never been asked to do this before, was such a beautiful thing to see as an adult.
Absolutely. And that's just a great example of the emotional intelligence of this show. We could talk about this for hours. I won't put you through that trauma. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for your time today. I loved this show, and I'm looking forward to more of your work to come.
Oh, thank you very much.